Sure. So let's talk a little bit about stats and Ornn artifacts. So like I'm working right now on the Ornn artifact guide, right? So it's really difficult, especially when the patch is really polarizing, which is why I always delay these until the first couple of patches. Because like let's say you just like look at the stats or you're trying to figure something out, right? Like flicker blades for example. There's lots of ways to sort it, so I'll try and explain the differences so it makes it a little bit clearer of what the journey is and what the difficulties are. So place just means like the average place that you have with this Ornn artifact and this unit combo, right? Delta, so there's delta and there's relative delta. Delta is like an average increase in the amount of placements in the stat. So when it says something is -1, that means that on average you're averaging based on the item's average. Let's say it's like an average placement of 3.4. Lee Sin with said item is going to average 1 better than that. And as you can see, it works out to be like around a 2, right? You average from 1 to 8th, right? You go 8th, that counts as an 8th. You go first, it counts as a 1. So that's what delta really means. Relative delta versus delta. So delta here is with respect to the item. So the item stats are going to look better if this item is paired with a certain unit. Relative delta is very similar, but what it's going to talk about is basically how much the placement's going to be affected based on the unit rather than the item. So I'll try my best to explain it, but basically this one, if you look at average placement, regular delta, they're around the same, but then relative delta is going to be different, right? It's going to sort out your rows a little bit differently. Relative delta usually refers to the item being good on the actual unit, and this is what's going to coincide with if you look on your stat explorer and you take a unit and you look up like their actual build, right? If you have a minus delta here, it's usually going to translate to that being a good item on the actual unit. However, a lot of times, like if a unit is particularly strong or really broken, then something like regular delta is going to show up to be like really powerful. So this can apply itself in certain situations. I want to find like a good example that's like really obvious for like the current patch, but there's like a couple of them. Like maybe an example is like for example, let's take like gamblers for example, right? So like there's a couple nuances of interpreting the stats, right? So gamblers, obviously you're gonna see that it's like it says that it's really good on Rise. Why is it really good on Rise? Is it a good Rise item? No, it's that Rise is usually a part of like the Gangplank board that's really powerful. So like this is something we have to keep our eyes on. Maybe in the future we can figure out if it's good or not. But as you can see, it's minus delta here and it says that it's a really good item, right? Minus 0.5, it has a good average placement. But it's not something you should prioritize playing Rise with, because like if we go here and we look up Rise for example, and you look up Gambler's Blade, it's not going to be a very good item on him. But a lot of times, it's usually that, like, it's leftover, if that makes sense, right? If you're taking a bunch of Ornn artifacts, you can see that it doesn't help, right? It's going to be pretty bad, right? If we go here and we look up Gamblers, you can see that it's a pretty bad item on him, typically based on, like, small sample size, but whatever. But the average placement of it looks really good if you sort it by just this column, because it means that you're playing a really strong board. So it's like the Gambler's Blade, you're probably playing with Gangplank, and then you don't want to have it on Gangplank because you want your main damage items on Gangplank. So then you're just transferring onto Rise later in the game. That's usually what's happening. That's can kind of like roughly explain this. It can also mean that like a lot of Rise boards maybe are like need a lot of gold, but it's never like used on him to be a primary carry. It's more so that like you played something that the Gambler's Blade helped you get to that board, and then you can put it on the other unit anyways. There are some other cases like this that are like there's a lot of things to look at when you look at stats like this with Ornn artifacts, which is why it gets like really difficult when there's like a particularly strong comp in the game. So for example, like Flicker Blades, this is a cash out for Crystal Gambit. So obviously it's going to look really good on Ashe, but how good is it on Ashe? It's hard to say without like having exclusions on Crystal Gambit. It is still going to be a good Ashe item because it makes sense with her, right? You can make sense of it, but it's not like as broken as it seems, because part of this is skewed towards playing Crystal Gambit, which then you have like the giga win percentage and you kind of win out for free. Lee Sin's also like that with 5 costs. I'm not sure if Lee Sin is just broken with every Ornn artifact. There's a lot of Ornn artifacts that are good with him, but a lot of it is just like really high cap to play around. But you can see like in a lot of situations, right? Like you'll see something like this, for example, right? Kale is a generally weaker comp, which you don't normally want to play towards because she's like really high risk. So you'll see that like if you sort by placement and delta, it'll be pretty bad. But it's pretty obvious that Flicker Blade is really good. If you look on Kale stats, Flicker Blade is one of her best items. A lot of this is like based on like your line selection. like which comps are the strongest to play that get skewed by the stats in such a way. And then relative delta is usually what the Ornn artifact is actually good on. And this usually will slowly adjust itself if a unit becomes good. Like if Kale gets a Giga buff, then Flicker Blade Kale, this is going to look like the most broken thing in the game because it's actually a really good item on her. There's lots of other stuff with it as well, but this is all the stuff that I have to parse out when I'm working on the Ornn artifact guide. A lot of it is hard because like for a lot of these artifacts, you're gonna see a lot of like the mentor and the lines that are really powerful just showing up a lot, like Deathfire Grasp, obviously, Blinding Jewel. This one makes sense though, but there's like a lot of them that are like I can't think of a strong example off rip. But a lot of them, like if you just open up like a bunch of Ornn artifacts, you're gonna see like a lot of them are really good on Rise or really good on Yasuo or really good on Udyr, and a lot of it is just based on like how it kind of falls into place with the current landscape of the game being like really dominant on certain comms being particularly broken or particularly strong. Right, like Yasuo with this might be good, but it's hard to say. But Gangplank with this being good is one thing, right? A lot of times it's like it's hard to say who the items are good on, because then like and the other part is like also when I'm sorting by relative delta, the other part that's really annoying for me is that like a lot of people don't understand what relative delta is and regular delta. So when I make an Ornn artifact guide, I have a lot more of a discussion with relative delta rather than delta, because usually I'm trying to find items that are good on units to make that unit particularly strong, right? Because if I'm saying, hey, who is a good holder of fish bones, Kai'Sa is, but it's just that on one particular patch or this patch, Kai'Sa might not be particularly strong. But if Kai'Sa gets buffed at all, this item unlocks her potential. It's a really good item on her. Problem is most people just look at this one and they'll be like, this guy doesn't know how to read stats, and then it'll be like, well, yes and no. It's like I can't just tell you, okay, play all the Ornn artifacts on Gangplank because Gangplank's broken right now. Then when you watch the Ornn artifact guide a week later and Gangplank gets nerfed, none of the items are going to be good on Gangplank anymore because he's nerfed and he's no longer broken. The only reason they're good on him is because he's broken. So it's just like, what am I supposed to do about that? So it's but it's hard to say. Like a lot of these, like some of them make sense in certain situations, but a lot of the times, like is Zhonya's a really good Gangplank item? It's like, no, I think Gangplank just busted, so it just works out really well on him, right? So it's like, that's why I like to wait a couple patches before I do the Ornn artifact guide. I know a lot of people want all the guides instantly so they can learn how to play the game, but it's like stuff like this, even like bonus fruits and all those other things, it's like you gotta let the broken shit simmer down a little bit, because it's just gonna be an absolute shit show gong show for me to like explain it in a way that like helps beginner players. Because like the main thing you always want to think about Ornn artifacts is they still have to make sense with the unit. You know what I mean? Like you want to put it on units where it's not necessarily skewed by one or two broken situations in a patch. You want to make sure that it's like actually makes sense with the effects that it gives you to actually like use on the units and play around the units that you want them to have that effect with, if that makes sense. So anyways, I've been going through it a lot. I took all my notes. We're going to see how things change tomorrow and the day after. But hopefully that answers some of your questions about the stats and stuff, right? Don't just focus on these two columns. These two columns are like what helps you the most on the current patch, just to tell you like what strong comps are or could possibly play around the items. But this one's the one that matters the most. And then you also have to know like the different high rolls and other stuff. Obviously, you're going to be skewed towards 5 costs, skewed towards Crystal Gambit in a lot of cases for Crystal Gambit cash outs. You're going to be skewed towards augments that give artifacts or anything like that, like Exalted Adventure in some cases where they're cash outs. So all of those, they show up in the numbers. So you have to have a deep knowledge of like where the numbers are coming from to make sure that you don't just get baited into throwing items on the wrong units. The only one that I really need to figure out is Lee Sin. Lee Sin's showing up everywhere, and that's the one that I don't have a clear answer for besides him being a 5 cost. So I actually have to see if any of these items are actually good on him or if it's like just like a shit show that I have to sort out